What would happen if Iran tried to turn Kuwait from a neighboring country into a battlefield? And why is President Trump warning that the next response could be far larger than the last one? The answer may depend less on a dramatic invasion order than on one dangerous calculation. How much pressure can every side absorb before a limited war becomes impossible to control? Before we unpack that calculation, tap like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who wants more than a loud headline. This story is changing quickly, and understanding the difference between a threat, a strike, and an invasion matters more than ever. The first thing to understand is that the question in the title has two different meanings. Is Iran about to send ground forces across the Kuwaiti border? And is Kuwait already being pulled into the war, even without Iranian troops occupying its cities? The first question has no confirmed answer. The second answer is much clearer. Reports say Iranian forces have targeted American military facilities in Kuwait. While Kuwait has been forced to deal with the consequences of a conflict it did not start. That is serious. But it is not the same thing as a confirmed invasion plan. That distinction is not a technical detail. It is the line between a dangerous regional confrontation and a completely different kind of war. A missile fired at a military facility is meant to punish, signal, or disrupt. A ground invasion is meant to seize and hold territory. Those missions require different forces, different logistics, different political decisions, and a willingness to accept a much higher cost. Iran may want to frighten Washington and expose the vulnerability of American bases. That does not automatically mean Tehran has decided to occupy Kuwait. Still, the fear is understandable. Kuwait sits at the northern end of the Persian Gulf, pressed between Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Iran across the water. It is small compared with the powers around it, but it is strategically enormous. Its ports, airfields, highways, energy facilities, and American military presence make it one of the most important pieces on the regional map. In a crisis, geography can become a sentence written by someone else. Kuwait also carries a memory that never really disappears. In 1990, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded the country, and the occupation was defeated only after a massive international coalition assembled under American leadership. That history shaped Kuwait's security policy for decades. The country invested in modern weapons and worked closely with larger partners, but its basic protection has always depended on something bigger than its own army. The belief that any attacker would immediately face the United States and other Gulf states. That belief is called deterrence. It works when an opponent thinks the price of aggression will be higher than the benefit. American bases in Kuwait are not there only to fight a war. Their presence is also intended to prevent one, but deterrence becomes complicated when the bases themselves are being used in a conflict. The same force that protects Kuwait can make Kuwait look like a direct participant to Iran's military planners. Recent reporting has described Iranian missiles and drones aimed at American positions in Kuwait and other Gulf countries. Iran says such attacks are retaliation for American strikes and are directed at military targets. Kuwait and its partners have responded with air defenses, warnings, and diplomatic protests. Even if an interceptor stops an incoming missile, the political message has already landed. Kuwait is being told that neutrality may not protect it from the consequences of hosting American forces. This is where the word invasion can distort the picture. The most immediate threat is not necessarily a column of Iranian tanks moving toward Kuwait City. It may be a continuing campaign of missiles, drones, cyber attacks, sabotage, pressure on shipping, and attacks by aligned groups. These methods can create fear and economic damage without requiring Iran to cross a border. They also give Tehran room to escalate or pause without making an irreversible decision. Iran has long built a security strategy around reaching beyond its own territory. Its Revolutionary Guard has developed missiles, drones, naval weapons, and relationships with armed groups in several countries. Supporters describe this as strategic depth. Critics describe it as a network of proxies that spreads instability. Either way, the result is the same for Kuwait. Danger can approach from the air, the sea, cyberspace, or through neighboring territory without looking like a traditional invasion. The most alarming statements are the public threats. Iranian officials and state-linked voices have warned that American military bases in Gulf countries could be targeted. Some reports have described threats against Kuwait and Bahrain if the United States expands its ground involvement. Those words should not be ignored, but they should also not be treated as proof that an operation has already been ordered. Governments use threats for several reasons. They may be preparing citizens for retaliation, trying to deter an enemy, competing with hardliners at home, or creating leverage before negotiations. The question is not simply what Iran says. The question is what Iran would gain by sending troops into Kuwait. At first glance, the answer might appear obvious. Attack the American presence where it is most exposed, but occupying Kuwait would create enormous problems. Iran would face the United States, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and potentially other partners at the same time. Its forces would have to cross or control difficult terrain and protect long supply lines. Any initial success could quickly become a larger coalition war. A military operation does not end when soldiers cross a border. It begins a chain of requirements. Troops need food, fuel, ammunition, medical evacuation, communications, air cover, and replacements. They need roads and bridges. They need protection from aircraft and drones. They need a plan for what happens after the first day. An attack can be launched with surprise. An occupation cannot survive on surprise alone. Kuwait's geography makes the calculation even harder. The country is compact, which can make a fast assault appear possible. But compact territory also means there are few places to hide from surveillance and air power. Ports, bases, roads, and energy sites can be watched closely. Iranian forces would be operating under the threat of American aircraft and long-range strikes. The ground may look open on a map, but every movement would be exposed to sensors and weapons. Iran can still cause tremendous damage without taking the country. A barrage could hit fuel storage, runways, radar systems, or command centers. A drone could force an airport to close. A cyber attack could disrupt banking, communications, or government services. A strike on a tanker could raise insurance costs and send energy prices higher. This is why the invasion question should not make viewers overlook the war that is already possible in the spaces below the threshold of invasion. And that war has a human face. Air defense crews may spend nights tracking objects they cannot identify with certainty. Families may hear warning sirens and wonder whether a sound in the distance is an interception or an impact. Foreign workers may worry about airports closing and borders tightening. Soldiers at bases may know that a building, a fuel truck, or a communications antenna could become a target simply because of its location. If you're watching this from outside the region, leave a comment with one word: invasion, retaliation, or containment. Your choice captures the central uncertainty of this crisis, and it also helps show how differently people are reading the same warnings. President Trump's response has to be understood inside that uncertainty. Public reports describe him weighing options and warning that Iran would face a severe response if it attacks American forces or disrupts shipping. His language is designed to signal strength, but it also creates a trap. If Washington promises a massive response and Iran strikes again, the administration may feel pressure to prove that the threat was real. If it responds too aggressively, Tehran may decide that restraint is pointless and widen the conflict. That is the escalation ladder. One side attacks a base, the other hits a command center. The first side targets an energy facility. The other threatens a port. A militia attacks a convoy. An air defense system makes a mistake. Each step can be explained as retaliation, yet the total effect can carry both sides far beyond what either planned. Leaders often control the first decision. They do not always control the chain of decisions that follows. Trump's strongest option is not necessarily the one that destroys the most targets. It may be the option that restores deterrence while leaving a path away from war. That could involve defensive reinforcements, strikes against carefully selected military assets, diplomatic pressure, protection for shipping, and a clear distinction between Iranian decision-makers and the civilian population. The problem is that every option carries risk. A limited strike can be interpreted as weakness. A broad strike can look like preparation for regime change. Washington also has to think about Kuwait's position. Kuwait is not just a base location. It is a sovereign state with its own government, citizens, economic interests, and relationships with other Arab countries. If American forces act from Kuwaiti territory, Kuwait cannot completely control how Iran interprets those actions. But if the United States responds in a way that causes massive damage inside Kuwait, Washington could weaken the very partnership it says it is defending. This is one reason Gulf governments often speak in careful language. They want American protection, but they do not want to become launch pads for a war with Iran. They want to preserve trade and energy exports, but they also need to show that attacks on their territory will not be accepted. They are balancing between security dependence and political independence. For smaller states, that balance is not abstract. It can determine whether a crisis is contained or whether their cities become targets. The United States has a large military advantage over Iran in air power, intelligence, naval power, and global logistics. That advantage is real. But superiority is not the same as immunity. Iran does not need to defeat the American military in a traditional battle to impose costs. It can threaten bases, make shipping dangerous, force expensive defensive deployments, and use uncertainty to pressure markets. A powerful country can win every individual exchange and still discover that the total campaign is becoming politically unsustainable. The same applies to Iran. It can fire missiles and drones, but its cities, infrastructure, air defenses, and military leadership are vulnerable to American and Israeli attacks. Iran's economy has already faced deep pressure for years. Prolonged war can reduce its ability to produce weapons, protect key sites, and pay for operations abroad. A government may speak as though it wants unlimited escalation while privately searching for a way to stop without appearing defeated. That gap between public language and private calculation is where analysts often disagree. One analyst may hear a threat and see a warning shot. Another may see preparation for a real operation. Both are working with incomplete information. Satellite images, troop movements, missile deployments, and official statements can suggest intent, but they cannot reveal every decision inside a closed command structure. The public is often asked to make a definite prediction from evidence that remains partial. For that reason, the most responsible answer today is not yes, Iran is about to invade Kuwait. It is that a ground invasion is a dangerous possibility discussed in the wider escalation scenario, but the available reporting more clearly shows attacks on American positions, threats, and regional spillover. The difference matters because sensational certainty can create panic, while false reassurance can leave people unprepared. A true invasion warning would likely involve several visible indicators. Large ground formations would need to move into staging areas. Transport vehicles, engineering units, fuel supplies, and medical support would appear in unusual concentrations. Iran would need to coordinate air defenses and create corridors for movement. It would need to prepare for American airstrikes and for the reaction of neighboring states. Even then, deception is possible. Military movements can be designed to intimidate rather than attack. There are also indicators of a different plan. If missile units disperse, naval forces become more active, cyber attacks increase, and allied groups begin striking in several places. Iran may be choosing a distributed pressure campaign instead of a ground assault. That approach is less visually dramatic, but it can be strategically effective. It forces Washington to defend many locations at once, making every base a security problem and every shipping route a political concern. The Strait of Hormuz is central to this calculation. The waterway is narrow, crowded, and vital to energy trade. Any attack on commercial shipping can create consequences far outside the Middle East. Tankers may turn back, insurers may raise premiums, companies may delay cargoes, markets may react before officials have confirmed exactly what happened. A conflict that begins with a base attack can become a global economic event through the maritime route. Iran knows that the strait is both a weapon and a vulnerability. Threatening it creates pressure on the United States and Gulf monarchies, but closing it would also damage Iran's neighbors and its own economic interests. The United States may try to keep the passage open through naval escorts and mine-clearing operations. Those missions could put sailors directly in the path of missiles, drones, mines, and fast attack boats. A single accident could become the incident that changes the whole war. The presence of proxy forces adds another layer. If an armed group in Iraq, Yemen, Syria, or elsewhere attacks an American or Gulf target, Washington must decide whether to treat that group as an independent actor or as part of Iran's wider strategy. Strike the group, and Iran may deny responsibility. Strike Iranian assets, and the conflict may widen. Do nothing, and allies may conclude that American warnings are empty. This is the dilemma behind Trump's response. A president has to protect troops and reassure partners while avoiding a promise that leaves no room for diplomacy. The public often sees only two choices: weakness or war. In reality, leaders are usually searching for a narrow middle path involving defense, punishment, signaling, and negotiation at the same time. That path can work, but it depends on communication that adversaries believe and allies understand. Another danger is misidentification. In a crowded sky, friendly aircraft, drones, missiles, and interceptors can appear within seconds of each other. Radar operators may have incomplete data. Pilots may be flying under stress. Air defense systems may be programmed to react faster than humans can deliberate. A mistake does not need to be intentional to become politically explosive. If an aircraft is shot down by friendly fire or a civilian object is misread as a threat, leaders may face immediate demands to retaliate. This is why claims circulating online must be handled carefully. A dramatic video may show an older incident. A social media account may turn an unconfirmed report into a fact. A government statement may describe a target in the most favorable way. Even casualty figures can change as authorities identify the dead and injured. The public needs speed, but speed without verification can make a crisis more dangerous. The original question also asks whether Kuwait can defend itself. The honest answer is that Kuwait's defense is not built around fighting a major regional power alone for an extended period. It has armed forces, air defenses, and trained personnel, but its security model depends on alliances, early warning, and rapid support. That is not unusual for a small state. Many countries survive not because they can defeat every attacker alone, but because attacking them would trigger a wider response. Kuwait's greatest shield may therefore be political rather than purely military. An attack on Kuwait would threaten American personnel, regional energy infrastructure, and the credibility of multiple partnerships. It could unite governments that otherwise disagree. Iran would have to ask whether striking Kuwait would produce the exact coalition it wants to avoid. The more clearly Kuwait is seen as a victim rather than an aggressor, the greater the diplomatic cost of attacking it. That is why a ground invasion, even a limited one, would be a strategic disaster for almost everyone. Kuwait would face destruction and displacement. Iran would invite a much larger military response. The United States would be pulled into a war it may not want. Gulf states would see their cities and energy systems threatened. The global economy would absorb another shock. Even if one side claimed victory, the region would be less stable and more militarized afterward. The terrible irony is that leaders can choose escalation because they believe it will prevent a larger war. Iran may believe a painful strike on an American base will force Washington to stop. Washington may believe a powerful response will convince Tehran to back down. Each side may see its own action as defensive and the other side's action as aggressive. When both governments think they are sending a final warning, the danger is that neither side hears a warning at all. At around this point, if you want this kind of careful breakdown instead of rumor-driven panic, use the like button as your signal. A like helps this video reach viewers who may see a shocking claim about Kuwait and need the facts separated from the fear. Then keep watching, because the most important issue is not simply what Iran can do. It is what every other actor may do after Iran moves. Iraq matters because it sits between Iran and Kuwait. Iraq's political landscape includes groups with close relationships to Tehran, but Baghdad also has its own interests and does not want to become a battlefield. If weapons, fighters, or supply routes move through Iraqi territory, the Iraqi government may face pressure from both sides. A violation of its territory could provoke a crisis even before Iranian troops reached Kuwait. Saudi Arabia matters because it borders Kuwait and hosts critical energy infrastructure. Riyadh has spent years trying to reduce tensions with Tehran while strengthening its defenses. It does not want Iran to dominate the Gulf, but it also understands the costs of direct confrontation. If Kuwait were attacked, Saudi leaders would have to decide how much military support to provide and how much risk to accept near their own oil facilities. Bahrain and Qatar matter because they also host important American facilities. An attack on one Gulf state could be a test of the entire regional network. Iran could try to overwhelm defenses by creating several simultaneous threats. The United States would have to distribute aircraft, ships, interceptors, and intelligence across a wide area. Defending every location perfectly may be impossible, so planners would prioritize the sites they consider most important. Israel matters because it has its own red lines and its own history with Iran. If Iranian missiles or allied forces attack Israel, Israeli leaders may respond directly. That could open another front and create pressure for the United States. Iran might use Gulf attacks to raise the cost of American involvement in Israel, while Israel might see restraint as a dangerous invitation. The region's conflicts are connected even when their immediate triggers are different. The public also needs to understand that American troops in Kuwait does not necessarily mean all of Kuwait is an American military operation. A host nation can permit bases while maintaining its own laws and policies. The presence of American forces makes Kuwait strategically important, but it does not erase Kuwaiti sovereignty. In a crisis, that distinction should guide both military planning and diplomatic communication. There's a temptation to compare the current situation directly with 1990 and 1991. The comparison is useful because Kuwait remembers invasion, and because the United States once led a huge coalition to liberate it. But the military environment is different now. Drones are more common. Precision missiles can threaten bases far from the front. Cyber operations can disrupt systems without a visible battlefield. The information war moves instantly. A campaign that once depended on massed armies may now begin with hundreds of small attacks. The old Gulf War also had a relatively clear political objective: remove Iraqi forces from Kuwait. A future conflict involving Iran would be harder to define. Would the goal be to stop attacks on bases, destroy missile infrastructure, force negotiations, change the government in Tehran, protect shipping? Each goal would require a different level of force and produce different risks. If leaders begin without a clear endpoint, military success may not create political success. Iran's leadership would also have to think about internal stability. A foreign attack can produce anger, but it can also expose weakness. Iranian leaders may use nationalism to rally support, while opponents accuse them of dragging the country into disaster. An attack on Kuwait could be presented as resistance to American power, yet it could also bring more sanctions, more strikes, and more hardship. The government's desire to appear strong may collide with its need to preserve the state. Kuwait faces its own difficult communication challenge. It must reassure citizens without pretending that threats do not exist. It must coordinate with Washington without appearing to surrender its independent policy. It must keep airports, ports, schools, and hospitals functioning while preparing for possible disruption. A calm public statement can prevent panic, but an overly confident statement can damage trust if the situation worsens. For people trying to follow the story, several questions are more useful than asking whether invasion is about to happen. Have missile launches increased in frequency? Are attacks aimed at military sites or civilian infrastructure? Are Iranian units moving toward a staging area? Are Gulf governments evacuating diplomats or changing travel rules? Is Washington adding defensive forces or preparing offensive formations? Are diplomatic channels still open? These clues together are more meaningful than one alarming sentence on television. The same logic applies to American ground operations in Iran. Air power can destroy selected sites from a distance. Ground troops would need to enter a large country with difficult terrain, a population of millions, and a military prepared for asymmetric warfare. That is why statements about boots on the ground carry such weight. Once soldiers enter, the political and human costs rise quickly. A mission described as limited may expand because the force must protect itself and achieve a result. If Trump orders a larger response, the opening phase may focus on air and naval power, not an immediate invasion. The United States could reinforce bases, strike missile launchers, target command nodes, and protect shipping. It might also use diplomacy to create a pause, but Iran could answer indirectly through partners, making it hard to know whether the response succeeded. A base could be quiet for a week and then come under attack again from a different direction. That cycle is what makes modern regional war so difficult. There is no single front line. There is no one capital whose capture ends the conflict. There are networks, supply routes, bases, ports, and political red lines. The side that can keep operating longer may gain leverage, but prolonged conflict increases the chance of civilian suffering and accidental escalation. The strongest argument against an imminent Iranian invasion is the cost. Tehran would know that crossing into Kuwait would likely trigger overwhelming American and regional action. It would sacrifice diplomatic room and invite attacks on Iranian territory. It might unite Gulf governments that prefer dialogue. It could also damage Iran's relationship with the Iraqi government and inflame opposition at home. Those costs do not make invasion impossible. The strongest argument for taking the threat seriously is that wars are not always chosen because they are wise. Leaders can miscalculate. A government under pressure may believe a dramatic operation is needed to restore credibility. A local commander may act beyond the original plan. An attack may be blamed on a group that is difficult to control. A false report may create the impression that an enemy has already crossed a red line. In that environment, intention can be overtaken by momentum. This is why the next stage may be decided by communication. Washington needs to make clear what it considers an attack on American personnel, what response is intended, and what actions would open a path to talks. Tehran needs to understand that threats against Kuwait will not remove American forces. They may instead bring more of them. Gulf governments need channels that reduce the risk of misunderstanding. Quiet diplomacy is not weakness when missiles are already in the air. There is also a moral question. When governments discuss bases, shipping lanes, and retaliation, civilians can disappear into the language of strategy. But Kuwait is not merely a location on a military map. It is home to families, workers, schools, hospitals, businesses, and communities. Iranian civilians are not the same as their government's military decisions. American service members are people, not numbers in a statement. Any response that treats human lives as an afterthought can win a headline and lose the future. The conflict also tests the meaning of sovereignty. If a country hosts foreign troops, does that make it responsible for actions launched from those bases? International politics rarely offers such a simple answer. The host government may support a defense relationship, but oppose an offensive operation. An attacking government may ignore that distinction because it wants to justify retaliation. The result is a dangerous gray zone where legal arguments, military facts, and political narratives collide. Energy markets will watch every development. Kuwait is a major oil producer, and the surrounding region contains some of the world's most important export routes. Damage to a single facility may not remove all supply, but fear can still affect prices. Shipping companies make decisions based on risk, not only confirmed destruction. If tankers avoid the Gulf, consumers may feel the impact. A regional military decision can arrive at a distant kitchen table without warning. This is why the story matters, even to viewers who have never heard a siren in Kuwait. The consequences can spread through trade, energy, alliances, and security policy. A successful diplomatic pause could stabilize markets. A strike that kills senior leaders could create a leadership vacuum and more uncertainty. A ground invasion could reshape the regional order. The choices made in a few rooms can reach millions of people who never had a vote in the war. At the same time, viewers should resist the idea that every new warning means the largest possible scenario is about to happen. News coverage rewards dramatic possibilities. Social media rewards certainty. Military planning includes options that may never be used. A country can prepare for an invasion without deciding to invade. A president can discuss a ground operation as leverage without ordering one. A threat can be serious and still be intended to stop short of action. The responsible position is therefore neither panic nor dismissal. Treat reported strikes as real unless they are corrected. Treat official claims as claims until independent evidence supports them. Watch for changes in force posture, not only changes in language. Remember that casualty figures and target descriptions may be revised, and when the answer is uncertain, say so. That is not a failure of analysis. It is honesty in a fast-moving war. For Kuwait, the immediate goal is survival and containment. Its leaders want attacks to stop, bases protected, and shipping maintained. For Iran, the goal may be to punish the United States, deter further attacks, and preserve its ability to negotiate. For Trump, the goal is to demonstrate that American troops cannot be attacked without consequences while avoiding an endless conflict. For Gulf allies, the goal is protection without becoming the next battlefield. Those goals overlap in one area. No side truly benefits from an invasion. That does not guarantee restraint. It does mean there is still a foundation for diplomacy. The most important signal would be a return to rules. Attacks on civilian areas are unacceptable. Host nations are not automatically combatants. And military retaliation should not erase talks. If you have stayed with this story, take a moment to subscribe for the next update, not because every prediction will be perfect, but because the facts will keep changing, and careful analysis matters most when the pressure is highest. Send this video to a friend who thinks the only question is whether tanks cross the border. The wider story is already unfolding in the air, at sea, and inside the decisions being made in Washington and Tehran. So, is Iran about to invade Kuwait? Based on the available reporting, there is no confirmed evidence that a full ground invasion is imminent. There are credible reasons to take the danger seriously. Iranian attacks on American positions, threats aimed at Gulf bases, and proxy operations. But the clearest current pattern is escalation below the level of occupation, not proof of an order to seize Kuwait. Trump's response is shaped by the need to restore deterrence. He wants Iran to believe that further attacks will carry a heavier cost. But the success of that strategy will depend on whether pressure produces caution or humiliation. A cornered government may stop or lash out. The difference can be decided by private messages, accurate intelligence, and the ability of leaders to leave room for an off-ramp. Kuwait's safety will depend on more than the strength of its partners. It will depend on whether those partners can coordinate and communicate. The United States can defend Kuwait, but defense is not only about interceptors. It is also about preventing a fatal situation. The region has seen this pattern before. A small state caught between stronger actors, a promise of protection, and a crisis moving fast. But history does not have to repeat itself exactly. Kuwait can remain a protected partner rather than becoming an occupied battlefield. Iran can use pressure without crossing into an act that invites catastrophe. Washington can respond firmly without confusing punishment with strategy. None of those outcomes is guaranteed, but all remain possible. The most frightening part is that every side has enough weapons and enough fear. A missile aimed at a base can miss its target. A drone can be misidentified. A warning can be misunderstood. A response can demand another response. That is how limited wars become wider wars. Kuwait is watching the sky because it has no choice. Washington is watching its bases. Tehran is watching the reaction because it wants to know whether threats can change the balance. The world is watching the Strait of Hormuz. The question, then, is not only whether Iran will invade Kuwait, it is whether the region can prevent the next strike from creating logic for more. If that chain is broken, Kuwait may remain a target under pressure, but avoid occupation. If the chain continues, retaliation becomes a struggle for survival. That is the real warning. Do not confuse the absence of tanks with the absence of war. Do not confuse a threat with proof of invasion. And do not assume that a powerful military can remove every risk once the first missile has been launched. The future of Kuwait may be decided not by one dramatic speech, but by a series of smaller choices made before the next siren sounds. If this video helped you separate what is confirmed from what is feared, subscribe and return for the next briefing. The situation may change before the headlines settle, and the next update could answer whether today's threats were meant to intimidate or prepare. Until then, remember the people living beneath the flight paths, the soldiers guarding the bases, and the difficult truth at the center of this story. In a crowded region, one country's battlefield can become everyone's emergency.